The words IFS stand for internal family systems. And the model is a way of helping people access the parts of them that are almost like the internal ideal mom and dad together, the internal ideal, loving, healing, compassionate, courageous, strong parent that can be there for the child, and accessing that part of the person and helping it support the healing of the inner children, the different places and spaces inside that might be in pain or carrying pain from the past. So there is this whole kind of perspective of that it's an internal family. We have different parts, and people that have really committed to this lifestyle live in a way that IFS calls self-leadership, which is a different way of saying in a way that's very intentional, very conscious, very thoughtful, very, again, compassionate, caring, containing, like this really beautiful blend of how to show up as a person.
This is Hope to Recharge. I'm Atana. I'm here to guide you and support you through your challenging times, navigating through depression, anxiety, and other mental health struggles.
Hi, everybody. I have the lovely Rikki Jacobson Davies. I've been waiting over 2.5, maybe even 3 years to record this episode. I think we were planning a little bit before October 7th to actually record, and then October 7th happened. I have never spoken to Rikki personally, and somebody that I know told me that Rikki has changed her life. Now, I know from recovery, from mental health, and from trauma that when somebody says change their life, it's not a simple word. It's not a simple term. And as soon as they said she changed my life, I said, I want to know more about it. What is it? And she said, it's IFS. And I said, what is IFS? It's a trending word. It's a trending term. Everybody's using it now. I would say I'm a little bit up to date with what's going on with the healing world and with different modalities. But IFS, I just heard the term and I really didn't understand what it was. She told me this about 3-4 years ago. And I said, I have to know all about this. She's like, you have to interview Rikki. So Rikki, thank you. Everything is in the right time. I believe in divine time. And I believe that Hashem wanted me to record it today and not 2.5, 3 years ago. So thank you for joining me here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am incredibly honored to be here, and thank you for the kind feedback. It's an honor. So excited to jump into this with you.
So right before we started recording, I asked you if you're doing this for a while, and we were going back and forth with the questions that I want to bring up in this interview, and we might have a 2-part interview. We'll see how far we can go. But you said it was interesting to know that majority of my audience are not clinicians, but they're not therapists. They're people that are actually going through the healing process. And you told me that you actually are more working with therapists. So tell me a little bit about your journey, how you got to IFS. Then we'll get into what IFS is, but what is it that you do now? And how did you get there?
Sure. So I learned very early on when I became a therapist how much I loved working with trauma. A lot of people think of trauma and they see so much pain, but I've always really seen hope. I've always really seen the person's capacity to heal. So I fell in love with trauma like right off the bat, already when I was still in grad school, and had very supportive supervisors who pushed me to go in that direction. So really, as soon as I was able to, I started to train in any modality that was related to trauma. So some training in EMDR, some training in somatic experiencing, some training in IFS, and that's how I got to IFS. Some training in sensory motor psychotherapy, which is from Janina Fisher. I did it with Janina Fisher. Really just trying to learn as much as I can about what it takes to heal from trauma, how to get back to the part of the person that goes just beyond all the trauma, and what we can tap into to help people heal. And that's how I got to IFS. I will say, though, that in my journey of trying to understand trauma and healing from trauma, like I said, I went through trainings with these various modalities, and I found that they were all talking about how to fix something, that like a wound that hadn't healed, a psychological wound that hadn't healed. But they weren't talking about wholeness in the first place and how we become who we are in the first place. So I found that was a piece really missing for me in the trauma world, and also recognized that a lot of people who don't necessarily have a clear and obvious trauma story, but didn't have adequate safety in their lives, will present as trauma survivors, but without anything to point to, which creates a lot of confusion for them or a lot of confusion in the therapy. And so my journey ended up being really about synthesizing trauma work and trauma interventions with attachment theories and self psychology and how we become who we are in the context of relationships and how to use therapy to really bring in both of those angles, not just what happened to you, but maybe what didn't happen to you. What did you not get?
Mhm.
What did you need but not have offered to you?
Mm.
Which nurturing might have been missing and maybe very well intended and well meaning, but just helping people make sense of their experiences using the wisdom of the trauma lens and extending it to be also with the how you become who you are in the first place lens as well. So that was it was in that journey that I discovered IFS and did what I can to tap into that amongst the other modalities.
So how old is IFS, like, in the world of healing? When did it start becoming popular?
If I'm not mistaken, I think it started in the 90s. I'm not sure. By early 2000, it was already a thing. Like the people that trained me already were Dick Schwartz had already really formalized the model, and he was already training people that trained me, I think, in the 2000s. So by the time I got trained, which was maybe something like 10 years ago, the people training me had already known it for a good 10 years or so. I'm not sure that this is exactly precise, but the trauma world as a whole really blew up in the last 3 decades. So
Mhm.
in the 90s, you suddenly had a lot of people coming to conclusions independently, but similar conclusions. We also have a lot more access to brain science and kind of what happens to the brain in the wake of trauma. There was just a lot more information suddenly available. And you had these different modalities blowing up, different ones taking center stage at different times. But but today we're definitely in an era where there is so much more of an understanding of the impact of trauma on people, and also so much more hope than there used to be. They really did not. Once a person had, let's say, formal PTSD, clinical PTSD, they really did not know what could be done for it. And today there's a lot more information, a lot more to work with, a lot more to try to offer people. And I, again, just want to say
Mm.
most of the people that I've worked with wouldn't necessarily fit the diagnostic criteria for like formal PTSD, but the spectrum of trauma shows up very often, even in people that don't have PTSD per se. They do have post traumatic symptoms, they do have unprocessed, unhealed psychological wounds that are still in a tremendous amount of pain, maybe walled off away in a general sense, but coming up, they can get activated, they can get triggered. It can really have a huge impact on their lives, even without meeting the clinical criteria. So the work of trauma is relevant for a lot more than those with diagnostic levels of clinical PTSD per se.
Hmm. I love that. I love the piece of hope and the piece of the evolution of therapy and healing, that we have more access to what you said, our brain and the science behind it, to be able to give tools. Because in the past, so many went on medication or in a straitjacket and they were hopeless. And they were the rest of their life, they were just being contained in their trauma reaction versus working through it in order to heal, which is like everything. Shavuos. Shavuos, we just finished Shavuot, and that was my first journey to the hospital 15 years ago. On Shavuot night, I was rushed to the hospital for my first panic attack, which I thought was a heart attack. They thought it was a heart attack or something like that. It was I've never experienced something like that. I was always like an anxious person, but I didn't know that there was a name for anxiety and there was a panic attack and what is that? And from Shavuot to Tisha B'Av, which is like 3, 4 months, the decline was so fast that by Tisha B'Av, I couldn't stand up. I wasn't swallowing anymore. I lost already 20 or 30 pounds. I couldn't speak. I couldn't sleep. And it was my rock bottom. And I remember saying to my psychiatrist, I remember when I went to the psychiatrist, I went to one psychiatrist and I went to my second one, which was my malach. And I said, I was literally shaking like this on his couch, and I was shaking and shaking. I said, "Tell me there's hope. Tell me there's hope. Tell me there's a way to fix my brain. Tell me there's like I was on repeat. Just tell me there's a way to fix my brain." Because he was explaining to me that my brain was having like a fracture or something, like an injury in my brain. And I didn't understand it. All I said was, "Tell me that you can fix my brain." And when he sat down and he's like, "Of course, we're gonna try our best, but you have to do the work." And he explained to me the different things that you have to do, which most psychiatrists don't even explain to you, that exercise, gratitude, meditation, your environment, not only medication. Most psychiatrists just take medication and go about your life. But he gave me tools. And I always say the fact that we have these tools, and IFS is one of the tools which I didn't have the privilege of tapping into when I'm curious about it. But the tools is what gives us hope to continue. So I love that you said that you're into not only understanding it, but how can we rewire? How can we tap into what we didn't even have? The trauma, it's not that somebody abandoned us or, God forbid, a rape or post a war or all these things, right? It's what did we not have that we might have needed, which created a trauma reaction. So I like that. So tell me now, Rikki, about did you have your own private practice and now you're going to teach clinicians? What was that transition?
Yeah, so I had a private practice for maybe it was a little under 10 years when I realized that I was hitting the limits of what I could do on my own. But at that point, I had already also been through, like I said, many of these trainings. And on the one hand, I saw incredible wisdom. On the other hand, I also saw some real limitations in the trainings.
Mhm.
Also, I saw the power of synthesizing different models and different approaches. So just when I was starting to feel like, oh, wow, there's this beautiful picture emerging of what therapy can look like, I felt like I was really hitting the limits of what I was able to do on my own. And I decided to expand. I had been at that point supervising some students, social work students as well. And I got to know some really lovely interns. And I had this dream for many years to open a center where we'd be able to work with people just in a really healing and holistic way. And so at that point, I decided to open the center, to launch the center. It was originally, the original model was I opened a small group practice, very personalized, just really personalized group practice with a few hand chosen clinicians. And in order to me for me, the group practice was very personal. I felt like every client who came through our door was mine, someone I really was so invested in. It never had this kind of anonymous feeling that sometimes bigger agencies can have. We kept it very small. I really knew every person from week to week what was going on in their therapy. I supervised everyone personally. I really cared. And for that reason, the whole idea of this was always to do something that I really believed in, and for that reason, I invested a tremendous amount in training the clinicians working for me. And the idea at the time was to train them based on what I felt was really critical for them to know if they were gonna be sitting with the clients that they had. When I opened up the doors of the training to other therapists, but the idea would be that we would have this in-house team that was very highly specialized in relational trauma and complex relationships and how we become who we are in the context of relationships and how therapy can be healing and how we can sidestep the ways that therapy inadvertently and unintentionally can hurt people. Over time, I saw, though, that our reach could be greater if I invested mostly in the training. What we were able to do in the in-house practice also ended up being quite limited. And so eventually, just for structural reasons and to be able to reach more therapists, I shifted gears. And as of this past year, I'm completing the first year that I've been like really predominantly doing trainings for therapists and investing in getting this way of working, really formalizing it, really getting it to as many therapists as I can and creating a very supportive network for therapists because I think that when therapists are better held, they hold their clients better. I think when therapists have a safe place that they can talk through all the challenges that come
Yeah.
up or the questions they have, or they're not sure if they're doing things right and they want an honest place where they can talk it through, they can show up for their
Yeah.
clients with so much more honesty, with so much more authenticity, with so much more integrity. And so that became my predominant focus, getting this model out and supporting the therapists who are invested and who want to do right by their clients, but they need support to do that in the best way. Sometimes the field can offer oversimplified answers or bypass really important things, avoid certain complexities. And the idea was if we provide enough safety and clarity for the therapist, they could do the same for their clients. So that's really the focus of my work today.
Wow. So you don't see clients one on one anymore?
I work, I do see some of the clients that I've seen in the past. So I have
Hmm.
some clients, the relationships are always very important to me. So I do see some of the clients that I've worked with in the past, and I offer one-on-one consultations or sometimes like a short series of consultations. So at this point, there
Hmm.
are the areas of expertise of the center, and people might reach out wanting a consultation about something very specific. So we'll do 6 sessions or something like that. But it's very guided, it's very focused. It's almost like a personalized workshop. Not quite a workshop, but
Right.
it's like they know that I have a certain approach and they want to be handheld in applying it to their situation. So there's a back and forth, but it's not the same as the clients and the client relationships that I had in the past. It's a very different style. But I do have the clients I see today are the people that I've seen in the past. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's understand IFS. What is IFS? What does it stand for? And if you can give us a little bit of a deep dive into the modality and how it's a little bit different than other modalities when it comes to trauma.
Yeah, sure. IFS, in some ways, from a scientific neurological perspective, it's actually very neurologically informed. I don't know that Dick Schwartz necessarily came about it from that angle, but it turned out to be very aligned with the sciences that we have today. So, in some ways, it is similar. It has certain similarities, but its method and flavor can be very different. In other ways, it is very different. IFS is much more than a modality. IFS is really a philosophy of the psyche, of what it means to be human in this world. And like I talked about earlier, uncovering the part of the person that goes beyond the trauma. IFS is really a perspective on what it means. It's a philosophy, it's a theory of personality development, but it's even more than that. It's really philosophy of how to be in this world in a way that is healing, in a way that is cherishing, in a way that does good for the individual and for the society. It's really a way of life for a lot of people. It's like a relational stance towards yourself and towards other people. It is a way of relating to yourself as a whole. So you can use that way a little bit like parenting. Parenting will sometimes play a very focused role in helping a child with a particular challenge, but parenting is just a way of being. And you might want to have a very loving stance towards your child, a very containing stance towards your child. There's something that goes way beyond what you do. It's how you show up, how you are, how you relate, how you hold, how you see, how you view. IFS is that internally, and the words IFS stand for internal family systems. And the model is a way of helping people access the parts of them that are almost like the internal ideal mom and dad together, the internal ideal, loving, healing, compassionate, courageous, strong parent that can be there for the child, and accessing that part of the person and helping it support the healing of the inner children, the different places and spaces inside that might be in pain or carrying pain from the past. So there is this whole kind of perspective of that it's an internal family. We have different parts, which we can get more into, but it is a lot more than a modality. It really is a way of being. And people that have really committed to this lifestyle live in a way that IFS calls self-leadership, which is a different way of saying in a way that's very intentional, very conscious, very thoughtful, very, again, compassionate, caring, containing, like this really beautiful blend of how to show up as a person. So it's really a whole bunch of things. It is also a modality for healing from trauma that has a really nice structure and approach to it that, like I said, it's very aligned with the sciences. In a way, it's a different flavor and a different feeling, but it's very aligned with some of the other modalities that are out there in terms of what it's achieving. It's just method can look and feel a little different, which is important because different people will respond to different flavors. And IFS definitely has a certain gentleness and compassionate flavor that, and very human witnessing flavor that many people appreciate and need and crave. When we talk about how we become who we are and those ingredients that nurture us, IFS teaches us how to really put the emphasis, shine the light on those ingredients and how to access it internally and or how to share it with others in a way that is healing.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp.com. That's BetterHelp.com, the leading online platform for therapy. Many people come to me for help, and one of my questions are you willing to go to therapy? Very often, it is very expensive. BetterHelp is affordable. You don't have to leave your house. You can get it from the comfort of your sofa, your bed, your office. It's one click away. There are thousands of licensed clinicians on this platform. Sometimes it's so overwhelming to go to therapy. Nowadays, most therapists are on Zoom. If you want to get 10% off your first month, use the link in the show notes, betterhelp.com/hope to recharge. Use the link below and start your therapy from the comfort of your home. Millions of people from all over the world are using them. If you don't know where to start, go to betterhelp.com/hope to recharge. That's betterhelp.com/hope to recharge. Start your wellness now.
What I understand from IFS that people often use it either right after EMDR or parallel to EMDR, which is very trauma-based therapy. Explain to me the relationship between them and why they work together or side by side or one after the other.
Sure. So this really, I think a helpful way to answer that would be really talking about what trauma has in common and then what trauma is and how trauma is
Mhm.
stored. And then based on that, what these
Yeah,
modalities, like what they're
offer.
working with will work and yeah, how they either support each other or one can fill in for the other.
Mhm.
So trauma, the simplest way to put it would be to think about it as a psychological wound that didn't heal. So if we go through an experience, to give an example, if we go through an experience as a child of touching a hot oven and getting burned, every child has been burned the first time. Most children are not traumatized from that. So the fact is that the brain has the amazing capacity to learn. We go through experiences and we learn. And the first time we're hit with an experience, it's very overwhelming, it's very painful, it's very confusing. It takes time for the brain, the psyche, the mind to know what to do with that information. But we are wired and programmed, we are designed to be able to learn from these experiences, make sense of the world, recognize, oh, some things are hot, I can get burned. That's actually okay. I can learn not to touch those things. I can learn to protect myself. The world felt very unpredictable and scary and overwhelming in that moment, but the brain makes sense of it. And then one of the things that the upper brain does once we make sense of these painful and overwhelming experiences is it actually neutralizes the emotional intensity and the sensations that taught us what we know. So most people breeze through these experiences like getting burned by an oven. Everyone got burned. Most people are not traumatized from that experience. However, above a certain threshold of pain and overwhelm, or fear, or powerlessness, or terror, or loneliness, or shame, any of the extreme emotions, extreme grief, any of the extreme emotions, it can be so extreme that it actually the brain operates differently under those circumstances, and the upper brain, which is responsible for organizing and learning all of these experiences, actually goes offline temporarily, and so the learning and the organizing doesn't happen, but the brain won't let go. It won't allow the upper brain to neutralize these experiences. It won't let go of it because it's almost like it knows, but there's something here I need to learn. I can't
Mhm.
let go of the information that taught me this, the pain, the fear, the loneliness, the injustice, whatever it is, the sense that I have inside. I can't let go of it. I can't neutralize it until I know what to do with it. And so a person is left with this unprocessed material. When we say processed, we mean the brain learned, made sense of it, organized it, filed it away, and allowed the feelings to go, including the physical, the physiological sensations, the somatic experience. With trauma, the brain doesn't let it go, but in order to survive, it separates it out from the rest of our psyche. So it's like we're not necessarily feeling all of that intensity all the time, but it's there somewhere. It's almost like a file that needs to be processed. And
Like a background noise that's like always on alert, like a protective thing that's
yeah,
there that no one sees, but you feel it that it's gonna jump out when it needs to be seen.
exactly. And it's almost like, to borrow from IFS language, it's almost like a part that is saying, I know there's something critically important here that I need to learn and need to know, but I don't know what it is. So I can't totally calm down. I have to be on extra alert. If there's anything even reminiscent, this is what a
Mhm.
trigger is. If there's anything even reminiscent, I need to get very nervous. I need to jump up. I need to do all the
Mm.
things that
Protects
might,
me from feeling that feelings again.
but it doesn't know exactly what protects it. And then it also is
Mhm.
confused. In addition to the actual learning with regard to navigating the outside world, it now has actually like a capsule, this kind of isolated capsule of pain that it wants to protect the psyche from feeling as well. So it's not just how do I protect myself from getting burned again, it's how do I protect myself from the fear and the overwhelm and terror and panic that gets activated whenever I go anywhere near anything reminiscent of that. So it's almost like this whole program inside that is very busy keeping these feelings at bay, ready to jump into action, but without an organized way of jumping into action. So again, healthy adaptive learning, this is an EMDR term, adaptive information processing. When a person learns in an organized way, they would develop a certain survival instinct, which is very helpful, which of us have as adults, where if you touch a hot pot, you will very often pull your hand away even before you feel the heat. That's the miracle of the survival brain. And this whole trauma is really a miracle gone awry. That's really what it is. It's
Mhm.
at core, it's a miraculous system of learning, a miraculous system of developing instincts. But when not properly organized, we develop maybe a set of instincts or irrelevant instincts or instincts that are responding to the wrong triggers. Usually, what the brain does is it separates out and it says, no, I don't have to worry about ovens and I don't have to worry about anything that looks like an oven. I'll be able to pinpoint when there's actual heat and an actual threat and use the actually relevant instinct. When it's not organized, the brain needs to be, and it has to err on the side of caution. So we're much more susceptible to a broad range of triggers, but not even necessarily the accurate one. Also, the survival responses that are generated are not necessarily organized and helpful for the real life situation. And this is that program in the background that's always active, always protective, but still without clear direction of what to do with itself. And so trauma work is essentially what all trauma modalities have in common is how do we get into that pocket of experience? We call it in our program just walls and whirlpools. We have these whirlpools of pain, what IFS calls exiles, these whirlpools of pain that the psyche has pocketed off, has walled off, because if we would feel it, it would be too overwhelming. It's still active, it's still alive. And so it's walled off, but it's active in the background and it's keeping entire systems and programs in place, so to speak. And also when it does get activated, when something breaches that wall, the experience is absolutely excruciating for people. And that's what, again, what we talk about when we say we were triggered or flooded, all of that volcano of pain that hasn't been processed, that by definition was so big that it threw the brain offline from doing what it does all the time, learning, processing, organizing. There's a volcano of excruciating experiences that feel really existentially threatening, really feel like they could break a person or kill a person. When it gets breached, it can be very overwhelming. Trauma healing is about getting into those whirlpools, getting past those walls in a safe way without totally overwhelming the person, and essentially helping the psyche do what it usually does automatically, which is process. Work it through, make sense of it, know where to put all that information. What did it mean that I was abandoned on the porch for 6 hours? What does it mean that, like, people don't know what to do with this? How do you live in a world that left you with this collection of terrifying messages about what it means to be in this world? Trauma work is about accessing those really walled off places inside that's left with all this material that it doesn't know what to do with, and providing it with a more updated sense of the world, a more realistic sense of the world, a way to make sense of it, a way to put it into context, a way to put it into time and space, a way to update the meaning that was taken from the experience. Like sometimes scary things happen. Usually I'm okay, or the ability to even know right now I'm okay. It doesn't mean the world is perfectly safe, but I'm not in an existentially threatening situation right now. There isn't critical urgency or a risk to my safety right now. So trauma work is not about helping people create this oversimplified, optimistic narrative where everything is fine, as much as helping people develop a more realistic sense of this world, including its dangers, as the brain organically does all the time. We just want to help it along and nudge it along when it got stuck on something, recognizing that activating that pool that it's stuck on could be very overwhelming for the person. So there's a lot of safety that has to be accounted for, a lot of overwhelm that can come up. And these are what the different techniques are about. To go back to the question about EMDR, the difference between EMDR and IFS when it comes to as a modality, when it comes to healing trauma, is really their methods are different, but what they have in common is they have their ways of helping people find these pools, because a lot of people don't know. We don't know what the source is. We just know that we felt totally flooded in a certain situation. And EMDR has their method of accessing and their method of helping the brain almost reprocess. They use the bilateral stimulation. What people are familiar with EMDR, the going back and forth between the eyes. And EMDR is coming. Everyone is trying to figure out, so how does the brain ordinarily do this? And EMDR says the brain actually has the capacity, and it seems to do this during REM sleep, like when the eyes are darting back and forth. They have their theory behind it, but essentially what they're doing is they use a few questions in the beginning of a session where they help people really access and pinpoint based on when the person, let's say, was triggered. They have very structured, directive, protocoled questions to help them really get closer and closer to that pool of experience that's stuck inside. And then once the person activates that pool, they also hold together with that. They have a person access a different pool of information, a more updated. They'll ask what the belief is, what the negative cognition is that's stuck, what it represents. When they get in touch with that experience, what kind of negative belief does it activate, does it represent? And the person might say, felt like I was going to die, or I'm not safe, or something like that. But they'll couple that with a more updated, more realistic belief, I am safe now. And then they use that reprocessing, the BLS, the bilateral stimulation, to really, it's almost like they're telling the brain, like, connect this map to this map, connect this pool of information. The person knows I'm safe today. That's why they choose that they want to believe that. But connect it to the part that's traumatized, that's still stuck on that information. And then they just almost direct the brain, and the brain does this incredible like processing that, again, organically it's naturally designed to do, but they almost facilitate it because it got stuck here. And this shift happens. It's really miraculous when it's helpful, when it's effective. The shift happens, and that's their methodology. IFS in a similar way, and then they make sure it's really thorough, it's really embodied. They make sure that the sensations are updated. They make sure that the emotions are updated. They make sure that all the distress is gone. So all of these things that we said the brain naturally, ordinarily does when it processes experience, EMDR facilitates and makes sure it's like, okay, now check with the body. Okay, now check with, check with the emotions. Make sure it's all kind of neutralized, cleared out, updated. The person has an updated sense, even in that place that was traumatized. IFS similarly connects what they call the self, which is almost like an internal conduit of that. It opens up a faucet of healing energy that we all just have internally inside. That was Dick Schwartz's major. So he's coming less from the perspective of the brain is designed to learn and the brain is designed to process. EMDR is saying the brain is designed to do this. But Dick Schwartz in a different way is saying humans are designed to do this. We are able to hold and heal ourselves. And what they do is peel away the layers that are blocking what they call the self. And the self is, again, like that, almost like this incredible source of healing energy. We know what it is because we all want it from other people. We all know the healing power of when someone truly is with us and truly sees us and truly contains us and holds us in their consciousness, the witnessing power. Like we know what it feels like to be held in the healing presence of another person. And what Dick Schwartz was saying is if you can access that inside yourself and create that same channel of connection between that part, he doesn't call it a part, but between the self and the part that is stuck, that's exiled away, that's locked away in a closet,
the wounded part.
Yeah, the wounded part holding that whirlpool of pain inside. If you can connect those two, if you can connect the self to the other parts in the system that are protecting the psyche from being overwhelmed by this pain or protecting the person from ever experiencing this again, if you take that channel of healing and, again, direct the attention of the person so that it's connecting to the right parts in the right way at the right time with the right energy, a lot can happen. And again, in its own method, with slightly different prompts, with slightly different cues, it walks the person and the self through a certain process to make sure they cover all bases. There can be like a real healing. Dick Schwartz is coming in from the premise that we are made up of parts. It's almost like a spiritual model. It's almost like the design of the soul. He discovered something that went so beyond what existed in the sciences that it really does have a spiritual flavor. And I'm quite sure that I've heard him say this made him believe in God. Like it was that kind of powerful, this amazing healing energy of people. And so even the parts he's coming less from, although the work is very aligned with the sciences, it's just a model of, it's a theory of personality that we are inherently made up of different parts. We have little people inside that are holding different roles and different positions within our internal system. And some are younger and some are older, and it's healthy and it's normal to be this way. And that's okay. What happens is that if a younger part experiences substantial trauma, the psyche splits it off, exiles it, almost like locks it in a closet. It's almost like that becomes the problem child. This kid is in too much pain. We don't know what to do with it. Again, this develops when we're very young. So if you imagine a bunch of young people alone in a house and it got very hurt and now it's screaming, and the rest of the kids are just managed, they might say, let's put this child in the room, just close the door, make sure we don't hear it. This isn't healing anything. It could be making it worse, but they might actually block the door. You don't hear anything, and they have a little slightly older child in charge of keeping that door shut. And it's the best the psyche can do when we're very young. But it's almost like IFS is about the parent finally coming home and accessing that self, that ideal mom and dad combined, and having it find the little kids who are blocking the closet and are so afraid of that, and who took on these very extreme roles to keep that pain. Just to give a practical example, it would be like a very kind of classic example would be like if a child was shamed because they were underperforming or weren't so good in school or whatever, and maybe things are also hard and their self-esteem is suffering. So it's almost like there's a little child that develops inside. As a child, they have this little 7-year-old, 8-year-old part absorbing messages of, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And they don't want to feel that. And then one day, the little 9-year-old, they're 9 now, the little 9-year-old discovers like, hey, when I push myself really hard, when I perform spectacularly well, I get all this good feedback. And then it kind of was like, hey, we can just be done with all that insecurity and all that fear and all that anxiety. And it puts the 7-year-old, so to speak, the 7-year-old into a closet and can come up with like a never again approach. And it becomes this little perfectionist and this little overachiever and this little performer. And in that way, it allows itself to block off the pain of that younger exile, that younger part inside, and experience on a regular basis a sense of security. The only problem is that at the root, there's this brewing, there's this bubbling, again, like volcanic energy of pain. And so the big question is going to be like, but what happens when it can't perform that way? So it's perfectly fine to have
Or
performance
when it
parts.
gets exhausting, or when it gets like
Exactly.
over, like it's just so tired from performing and it just wants to be okay with not the performance.
Exactly. And the difference here between a performance part that has its roots in trauma is that it has to continue. It's holding the burden of keeping the exile at bay. And so it's
Mm.
exhausting to perform. It's exhausting to perform and not be able to stop. It's exhausting to know that if I stop, I don't know what I have. I'm going to drown in that pain of insecurity that's underneath this. And so yes, for many reasons, this kind of at some point catches up with people. It also, because it's so focused on keeping that pain at bay, it has a more narrow focus in terms of the impact on other areas of the person's life. So like you said, the person can really wear themselves out or become exhausted. It almost like it can't afford to look at the big picture or the long term or the impact on the rest of the psyche. So eventually it wears people down or it creates challenges or stress in other areas. And again, the big telltale sign, this is like where CBT may or may not touch deep enough. The big telltale sign will be like, what if we taught you to do differently? Can you? And when it's a part that's really it has a trauma burden at its root and it's keeping that trauma burden and that trauma pain at bay, it doesn't want to learn something else. It is scared to learn something
It's
else.
not enough to know. It's important to know where it came from, but it's not enough. It doesn't fix it.
Right.
So the CBT is about like how do we understand where the wound was created, and then IFS is okay. Let's give a tool to free it from the exile that you speak of, and mainstream it to be able to perform healthily in life.
Yeah, and I would say also CBT might even be like, "Oh my gosh, this is fine. Let's teach you to do something differently. Let's give you a behavioral intervention and teach you how to not be perfectionistic and can deal with
Mhm.
not being perfectionistic." But until we
Yeah.
uncover and heal that root trauma, it won't want to. So some people may show up and they really might not have a certain skill and they're so excited for a reframe or an intervention or like a plan. I can work on this, I can work on that, I can practice this, I can practice that. When trauma is at the root, it's like, but I wouldn't want to do that. I want to be perfectionistic because I need to be perfectionistic because at my core, I sense a certain dread and danger of if I let go of this, I don't know what's going to happen. And then, like you said, knowing it can be helpful. But real trauma work, and in this case, IFS, is about really getting in there and healing it, finding and reclaiming and comforting and soothing that child and making sense of a world that way back when was way too overwhelming for it and allowing it to be updated and to know I'm actually not that child anymore. I actually did make it. I might even be successful, or I might have learned the art of self acceptance in another part of my life that I can apply here and learn to accept myself without all of this intensity around performance. And I even get to continue to perform, but not with this existential concern behind the scenes. More as like, I would love to, and when it works, great. And when not, I can put it aside and account for a more balanced consideration of the different parts of myself, the other things I need, rest, repair, all the other things that might not be working well with that, or the impact that this is having on other people in my family or friends or whatever it might be. And so
Right.
IFS is about getting into that, really finding what we call the manager, which is like the performance part, the one keeping the exile at bay, and finding out where do you come from? When were you born? Why did you need to be here? What role were you playing? It's about really honoring the role it was playing. So things that can be perceived as dysfunctional, IFS takes a very honoring and respectful approach. Again, like imagine, children surviving alone in a house for years. We would be in awe of children that survive that. And that's really what IFS is trying to promote, really being in awe of all of these parts. Like they're amazing and they help people survive. And I'm here now. Can I take over? Can we develop trust? Can I look out for you? Can you update your job? You're going to be part of the team. You're amazing. Let's just take that burden off of you. And you know what? You're not going to want to because you know about the 7-year-old in the closet, the exile. How about we go into that exile? Let the exile meet me. Let me be there for the exile. Let me help it. And then I'll let you watch and I'll let you see the work that's done. So it's this really beautiful kind of human flavor. And that's where it's very different than EMDR. EMDR is very powerful neurologically for the people that it works for. Not, it doesn't work for everybody.
So they're
But
not parallel. That people Are they parallel? Do they work side by side? Is it like I often hear people say, I did EMDR and I maxed out on it. Like it helped me. Now I'm going to IFS. Or is it just by accident that people do it this way?
It
What are your
it totally it could be parallel, it could be one after the other. Thing about any modality is that modalities have a very distinct flavor, and humans are always so much more than one flavor. And so some
Mm,
people will find IFS, discover it, and say, "This is it. This is my thing for the rest of my life." But that will usually be as a lifestyle. As a modality, it can be exhausting to do any one modality again and again and again. They each have kind of their flavor, or they go as far as they go. We are much more complex, and what EMDR manages to touch in one person, it might not touch in another person, or it might not touch other areas within that person. So each one of them has their limitations. I've seen people also do IFS and then burn out, not necessarily as a lifestyle and as a way of relating to themselves, but as a modality, this deep, intense work of finding the exiles. But they could totally be done side by side. They could even be integrated. So today there are different approaches that kind of are informed. They might be like, oh, now we have a good window to help the brain do the work.
mm,
But now the brain is getting stuck. What if we bring in IFS? And as the person is processing on that really neurological level, but they're looping or they're getting stuck, what if we say, can you see that 7-year-old child? How do you feel towards her? And it opens up this conduit of compassion from the self. And the person's like, wow, she's just 7. She's such a child. And we feel that compassion coming from this IFS perspective. And then we go back into the EMDR processing now that the brain has this thing to work with, this kind of new energy to work with within the process. So it really can be blended. There are different ways to blend it. Some people will do IFS predominantly, but if somebody's looping, they'll bring in the bilateral stimulation and really help the person like move things around when something's stuck. And that's really, I think, the takeaway both for therapists and clients is just to always remember we are so much more than one perspective or one
yeah.
modality, really honoring your experience. And if it's working, lean in. And if it's not, don't worry. There are so many, there are enough other things to consider and to try. Some people just love one flavor, some people love another. IFS is very big on the flavor of being witnessed. Some people really want their story to be witnessed. They don't just want to fix and rewire their brain. They want the witnessing. Other people are like, no, thank you. If you can just get rid of the symptom by doing some stuff with my brain, do that magic with the wand. I don't care. That's
Yeah.
good enough for
So
me. Like, I
true.
don't put anything on the nature of the story. So they each have different flavors.
Yeah.
And it's important to really be tuned to your own and for your therapist, to your client's
What you need
experience.
and what connects to you and what can you actually use as a tool to get to furthest in your recovery and your healing. So what this is fascinating. First of all, fascinating. So I have a lot of questions that came up along the way. So when it comes to IFS, do I need to know my trauma before I start internal family system? So I have to say, okay, this is what's happening in my life. Let's say, for example, I'll take my panic attack. So I'm having panic attacks and I'm afraid when the panic attack starts, I'm referring to my first panic attack and I'm afraid of the fear that comes. And so if I didn't have that panic attack, the first one to experience the fear of the fear, right? So do I even have what to come to IFS if I like, oh, my life is great? Do I need to know the source of the trauma or do I need to even, or can I say, you know what? I'm coming with an addiction. I'm coming with a behavioral thing. I'm coming, but I don't know what is the root, the exile, as you say.
What are we doing to help ourselves improve and heal? What's important to us? How can we cultivate small changes in our brain, in our day-to-day life with our own tools? Sometimes this process is very lonely and hard. Sometimes you need a therapist, a psychiatrist, and somebody like me, somebody that went through the same thing. And I love working with people that are ready to do the work because it is expensive. It's a lifelong investment into yourself, into your future. When you start working with me, you're investing into your long-term stability, into your long-term mental health. What are you willing to do to make the changes? You could say, I don't know what I want. I don't even believe things can change, but I'm no longer willing to stay in this position where I am now. Choose yourself. If you want to work one-on-one, link is in the show notes. Schedule a free 30-minute consultation and be ready to see a different you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So no, you definitely don't need to know the exile. People come into therapy, generally speaking, because there's a pain point. Like you said, it could be an addiction. It could be a behavioral pattern. There's something in their life that bothers them. It could be something that they feel. They might not even be doing anything that bothers them, but they get these waves of sadness that they can't explain, or something that they're doing, or they're overreacting, but they have no idea what the roots are. It's very common. I would say it's much more common in trauma therapy for people initially to come to therapy and they don't necessarily know their trauma stories or their exiles or where things originated. And that's perfectly fine. Every trauma modality, including IFS, has their method to help you find that. So IFS it has this like way of using the presenting pain point, the thing that you're feeling, the thing that you do know is bothering you. I get very angry. I get very impatient. I check out every day at 4 p.m. and I can't explain why, whatever it might be. IFS, part of the method is to use your pain point as you experience it, the thing bothering you. And that becomes what IFS calls a trailhead. But basically, part of the modality is to use that trailhead and follow a certain, again, these things are quite structured, although it will hopefully be applied in a fluid and human way. There is a certain structure, and the idea is to really help you use that pain point to slowly get further, deeper and deeper into your psyche, into your subconscious space, and start to put the pieces together, follow the trail to see where it leads when the protocol is effective, which it often is if people are ready for it. It slowly leads you to that which needs to be known. Sometimes it will take you all the way to the exile, the deepest pain inside, but sometimes there's layers and layers of a story and you start getting in there. The thing about memory is that what we remember on a conscious level is very different than the memory we have subconsciously. And so a lot of these methods utilize this more like intrapsychic, introspective, this like kind of subconscious communication, a whole different way of communicating with your psyche to learn like, what's this about? So if I ask you, what's this? Let's say if we take an addiction or the fear of the fear, if I asked you what's it about, you can analyze and give me all sorts of theories about what it's about, but we don't know. Maybe it isn't somewhere inside. And when we turn
And
inward,
how do you know when you know? How do you know when you got to that knowing?
yeah,
And
so
it's not the
that's
story you're telling yourself, because sometimes we have a story we tell ourselves, but it's not the core. So how do we know when we know?
exactly. So there are different types of knowings. There are narrative knowings, like I know that this and this happened to me when I was a child, and you might be right, and that might be relevant. There are analytical knowings, like I think it could be this because I read in a book and I have a theory, right? Now, that really may or may not have anything to do with this. And then there are
Mhm.
experiential knowings, felt knowings. So it's like when you turn inward, the narrative story may or may not be accurate on a narrative level. When a person, let's say if we talk about the perfectionism with this like young part of insecurity, we may or may not remember what happened in the second grade. But we know experiential, oh my gosh, I just hit a space of insecurity. That is real. That's not a question. I don't know on a narrative level. I don't necessarily remember. People can work with very young trauma. So people, let's say, will find parts inside that the experience feels like the feeling of a 2-year-old or a terrified 1-year-old. Now, did the trauma happen when they were 6 months or 16 months or 26 months? We might not know on a narrative level, but experientially, we know there is a space inside that is experiencing the panic of what feels like a 1-year-old, and we're going to use it as such. Healing from trauma is very different than making a case in court. So in court, it's like the facts matter. If your foot hurts, if it's because you fell or because you slept on it wrong, the fact is the pain is real and we want to be able to work with the pain. And so this can be confusing for people, especially because part of trauma very often is self-doubt.
Because we're trying to heal the trauma. So if we're not healing the exact trauma, what are we healing? Are we healing the reaction or the
Yeah,
feeling? And it doesn't matter what the trauma is.
we're not healing the story because the story is over. We're healing the pocket of pain that exists today. The pocket of pain with its associated ways of managing the pain that exists today. So if in theory the story is different than the one that we remember, what we know for sure is the pocket of pain is what's there right now, which is why let's say things like somatic experiencing might work with very little story, but we do know that you're feeling a tremendous tightness in your body and panic and terror. If back when you were 4, was it originally more panic or more fear or more shame? It almost, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's like the origins of the story on a narrative level is not really what we're working with. We're working with the current imprint on the psyche, on the body, on the soul, on the emotional system. And we have different ways
I
of
want to give
access.
an example. Okay. Okay. So let's take an example of, let's see how we can go that I can understand a little bit. I don't know how much we can unravel here, but just for a taste of it. For example, in my life, I have an obsession with food prep. I always feel that there's not going to be enough. I love the kitchen. I love cooking, but it becomes like an anxiety. I dream at night sometimes that there's not enough food for Shabbat. There's always abundant left. There's never a lack, like never. And every time when the meal comes or when the preparation, like when we're actually at the moment, I'm like, what was I thinking? And it's not like I can't base 400 Shabbatot to say, oh, you've never gone hungry. You always had enough, even if people walk through the door. But there's this, I literally have this current, usually Friday night, that I forgot to cook. I forgot it was Shabbat. I forgot to shop. And this, like, oh my God, what if we don't have enough food?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's constant. So, and I have no idea where it came from. Like, where is this
Right.
from?
So if we were going with an analytical/narrative approach, we could talk about your childhood and we could come up with a theory that might be very accurate about where this was born and why this developed. On an experiential level, like when you're even sharing this, your body can literally activate. You can actually feel that part. You can feel the energy of that part. You can feel the presence of that part very often. Maybe now, maybe not now, but we would be able to get you there. We would be able to have you really almost what IFS calls find, in quotes, find the part, really find the experience of it and really listen to it. So let's say I said, let's say I decided based on what you said. So it sounds like that part is a not trusting part. It doesn't trust that you're going to have food. And on a narrative level, that might be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But then you check inside and you're like, no, that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like a not trusting part. It feels like a part that's responsible for being prepared for some reason. That just feels more true. It's if I would ask you, what would you call the part? We could guess a name, but then you would check inside. Does that resonate internally? Am I really capturing the experience? Am I touching it as it is? And
For
if we
me,
call
what right away came up shame. Right away
oh,
came
okay,
up
there,
shame. Like,
okay,
no, it's not. Prepared is, it would be a reaction to it. It wouldn't be the part. So the part by me is shame. What would happen if I don't have enough? It's shame. It's not even fear of starvation. It's shame.
there you go. And just notice how you knew that. Nobody in the world can talk you out of that. We could because we can gaslight each other, but you can't be talked out of that. You know that your body knows that. Your felt sense
Mhm.
knows that. Your experience knows that. Now, you don't know that because we just, maybe you did. Whether or not you quickly went through your entire childhood and figured that out cognitively, you don't even need to. You tune inward. You heard me say something, and by contrast, you were like, nope, it's not that. It's shame. You just know. That's experiential knowing. That's felt knowing.
Okay.
And that's the
So I don't
experience
need
that,
to know where it's coming from. I don't need to know where that shame was born.
right, not technically. In reality, if we went in there and really listened to that part, one of the things that we do is we do listening and witnessing and embracing. So if we did get to the core of that part, would potentially and very often actually suddenly remember experiences that are relevant and produce them and almost share them with you in a way that you might not remember cognitively. So if we went through like on a narrative cognitive level, if I was like, oh, tell me about your childhood, again, like in theory, if you told me about your childhood and I was like, nope, no shame there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. The fact is the shame is there. And we know that because you feel it, right? When we actually got into that part and it wanted to share again, IFS, the whole model of IFS is about allowing you to really access it and make it alive, make it present, make it able to share its story in the best way it can. And sometimes in sharing its story, it will remind you of things that you forgot about. And sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes very young parts will find a way of sharing their experience, not with real facts, but almost based on how they see it. So an example would be if somebody, let's say they had a parent who was very dominant and very critical and very frightening, and they had another parent who was loving and supportive, but not able to stand up to the more frightening parent at all. And let's say we get in
Mhm.
touch with an exile carrying the shame or the fear of the more frightening parent. And we ask the exile to tell us its story. What does it need to share with us? And it shows us an image of, let's say the mother was the frightening one. It shows us an image of the mother at the table making fun of them in front of everybody. And then it shows us another image of the mother blaming them and shaming them and making it all their fault. And it shows us all these scary images of what it went through. Again, are those memories exactly precise or not? It doesn't matter. That's what it's carrying inside. That's its story. That's what it's absorbed. That's what it was left with. We're not in court. We're trying to heal a broken heart, a little tiny child's broken heart. But an example would be like, let's say we asked that part, like, and what about daddy? Is daddy there? And this part in its experience is, oh no, there is no daddy. we're not saying there was no daddy. There was a daddy,
Right.
but experientially, it didn't help. This part experienced the isolation and the loneliness in that moment, in those capsules of
Mm,
pain. In a general way, they knew there was a daddy, and it did very much help and maybe saved them emotionally and
mhm,
psychologically. But that wound, that is almost the definition of trauma. It doesn't even know there's a daddy. It's locked away in the closet. In that moment, it felt like this is what trauma does. It's a disorganized, almost inaccurate sense of reality based on the existential overwhelm of the moment. So it has accuracy in it. But the point is, it doesn't get to share or glean information from the rest of the system. So the fact that everyone else inside
mm,
of her knows their daddy, this exile missed it. But it went through an experience that was so overwhelming, it knocked off the upper brain, the part that knows there's a daddy, the part that knows it's going to be okay, the part that knows that there's comfort, and it trapped this experience in an isolated way as it is, this kind of overwhelming, terrified, humiliating, shaming experience of just a scary mom and no dad. So that's the difference between emotional knowing or felt knowing or experiential knowing versus knowing the story per se. And sometimes people think my trauma originated in one place and that's their story. It might be true, it might have some truth to it, but they suddenly go inside and that they're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot there was this whole other thing that also went on. Or I never made the connection, but I had an older sibling who actually was just so mean to me. You know, they
mm.
bullied me my whole childhood. I never made that connection. I was so aware that this parent was critical or that I failed in school. I never really thought of the impact, or maybe it was a younger sibling, so I didn't even record it that way. It was like on a narrative level, I was like, nah, whatever, that was nothing. It was my younger sibling. But when I go inside and
Mm.
I get in touch with the felt experience of it, that little part suddenly produces and it shares. And that little sibling was so mean. And then they start really crying. Like you see, they really activated a certain
Wow.
experiential pool. And
Wow.
yeah, it's a very powerful work. And
That's
we
when
were
the connection happens by just experiencing it again and understanding where it came from. That's the healing
the healing is experiencing it in the loving, compassionate, holding,
in a
understanding,
safe
wise,
space.
in this case, intrapsychically, in the presence of the self internally.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The IFS,
Best
like
version of
internal team, and the team that we come, I'm assuming that we bring self to the table and we like check in with it and we ask
yeah.
it to be there, right? Or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. We're almost like facilitating a conversation between self and the part. We won't go to in the IFS model, we won't go to an exile unless self is present to be there for it back and forth. And unless the exile, no, we won't continue with the exile until it knows, so to speak, experientially, that self is there. So we might ask, how old is the part? And the person might say 4 or 7. And then it's, how do you feel towards the part? We want to make sure that there's a loving flow of energy between the self and the part. So if they say, ugh, I don't like it, that's not self energy. And we're not going to get closer. We're not going to take a wounded child
but
in a
how do I
closet.
know when self is coming in? How do I know? How do I know when
Yeah.
self is in the room coming in?
Yeah. So IFS has this very kind of detailed, almost checklist of like self-like energy or self-like capacities. They have their famous, what they call the famous, like the 8 C's. So you really want to check for, are these things present? Compassion, curiosity, containment,
Mm.
courage. You can look them up. I'm not calm, connected.
Oh my God, that's like God. So you're
Exactly.
basically asking for the God inside you to come out, the Tselem Elohim, to come and say, "You created me." It's funny. I got this necklace from Dita R. You know who Dita R? One of the hostages' moms, and it says Tselem Elohim Imal Mamash, and she says that we bring the when we understand through the Hasidic in Tanya, it says mamash, Tzelem Eloka Mimal mamash, that we
Mhm.
bring the godliness, the God part of us in to the world through our bodies. So he shines through us. So basically, I think what you're saying is bring the God part of what God created us with all the imperfections of ourselves and say, "There's, I see you."
It's literally exactly that. And I'm happy you're shining the light on this because I just was like, it's like the internal mom and dad. But no, it really is. It's the internal godliness. It's this healing capacity that we have internally. It's astonishing when we get in touch with it. It really is godly. Like I understand coming to believe in God through this. I know a lot of doctors say that they came to believe in God through the miracle of the body. I have believed in God my whole life, but the miracle of the psyche is like, I am just sometimes, my jaw is on the floor when I'm like, wow, that is a godly thing that I just witnessed, and the healing. So yes, we're bringing this incredible healing energy. I think of it almost more as like a conduit of godliness versus a place in the person. It's almost like the person is connected to something so much bigger than themselves that they're a
Mm.
conduit for. And we facilitate a conversation between what IFS calls the self, which is all the place inside that has this energy and shares this energy, facilitating a really healing kind of conversation and process between the self and the part. And again, it's not just a conversation, which is more narrative. It's an experience. The little part shows the self what it needs the self to see. It allows itself to finally be witnessed for its pain and seen and understood. And it feels the energy of being understood. So when we check in, we're constantly facilitating conversation and checking in. We might ask, wow, how do you feel towards this little part when you see this thing that it's showing you? And the person, their adult self, might really start crying and say, I just understand them so much better now. And then we'll say, does it know that? Does it hear you? What's it like for it? So we're really bringing in, we're facilitating an experiential conversation, share that understanding with the little part. And then we ask, does it know it? And we wait until they say, yeah, wow, it does know it. And so what's it like for them? And we watch the person experientially updating. They're literally updating the experience. The little part inside absorbs all that understanding, absorbs all that care, absorbs all that witnessing and the experience of being seen. And we see it somatically. We see the person physiologically, their energy shifting. We see the release of all that sadness or pain. We see a lot of people in this process will reach a point where we'll say, what do you want to say to the little part? And they'll say, I just want to hug it. I just want to hold it. These are little
Mm.
parts. They just want to be held. They don't know from fancy language. And we'll say, so go ahead and do that. And people do that internally. Most people do these processes with their eyes closed or looking off center. They're really in a different space inside. And they experience themselves holding or hugging or comforting a little part. And again, we really just stay in that zone for as long as the part needs, or we come back to it if we have to take a break because of the structure of therapy. But we just go back to it again and again. We encourage people to
You mean
visit.
every session you go back? Can you visit a part for a year? Like work on one part for a year? Tell me the process of IFS. How long does it take if somebody comes for, let's take some like a trauma. Let's say somebody's coming from a trauma of trying to think of something not so big. I'll take religious trauma because it's something that comes up a lot and a lot
Yeah,
of my audience will listen. So shaming in schools, for example, being shamed for religious trauma.
yeah. So one of the
So,
things, yeah, go on.
no, so I want to know, does it take like years to figure it out, this one part, or is it different parts are coming up during this experience? And is it 5 years of IFS, or like you said, it's a lifestyle? Once you start learning to talk to it, you could do it alone without a practitioner. And how do we know when the trauma is processed enough to be safe without a practitioner? I know question.
It's a good question. And of course, it's going to be very individual. But A, like you said, it's really a lifestyle. So one of the things that people can really move toward, one of the things that really is distinct about IFS is how empowering it is in this sense. That people really can be moved through. Now, this is also the downside, and I want to caution people. Some people will resist IFS because of the nature of it being so empowering. People are like, I don't want to be my own internal mom and dad. I never had one. The last thing I want is to parent myself, which
Hmm.
I argue is not really
Wow.
speaking. It's one of the managers speaking. Be that as it may, we need to really respect people. And I'm totally comfortable
Hmm.
with what IFS calls lending self. I don't think we must have the person do this for themselves. But what we can, when people really do experience true self, it is so empowering. And the idea that they can access that and they can be there for themselves throughout the week when they want it is something that many people grow into and really appreciate and come to value. The nature of the processing, it really is so individual. Some people are like very steady, consistent. Their system overall is steady and consistent. Then they'll say, I found the exile, let's say the part that was shamed in school, and I know it. And trauma clusters. So if a person had shaming in school with regard to religion, and they also had a little bullying from someone who shamed them, and then just we all go through the shames of life, that's going to cluster. And so when you find this exile, it's not one exile. There are going to be multiple exiles holding similar stories that are going to want to maybe join the
Hmm.
process of healing, get in on the experience. And the IFS process, when you do a single session as per the protocol from A to Z, you'll actually check when things are going well, when you're deep in the reprocessing and you've done the witnessing and you're already unloading, you might invite and say, is there anyone else inside who wants to join, who wants to
Wow.
be in this with us? Yeah, it's almost like I have images of doing this work with
Mm,
people where they were sitting around a fireplace, again, in their minds, experientially sitting around a fireplace with the little part who's much calmer. And then, like, a 12-year-old wants to join the little bonfire and throw their shame into the fire. It's really very beautiful and experiential. People need to be comfortable with that, but there are ways to be creative if they don't love that version. So it's very individual. Some people will stay on a certain theme for a while. A lot of people will work with what's present that week. And if there's a certain
mm,
part that they know is not, so to speak, fully some people will be mid-process and they will feel a little overwhelmed and they will say, like, you know what, I don't want to work with this exile. There are also different ways. It's a very honoring approach. So there are different ways of almost like creating a safe space for the exile to wait in the meantime. Could we give her
mm,
just even a slightly safer space than she is? Could we at least put her in her bedroom? Could we at least make her a little cabin outside the house with somebody watching her? It's all very experiential. So that's the beauty of, you get to borrow from the resources at your disposal and use creativity to create a different experience inside, but really honoring the truth of where you're at. If you're not ready to parent her, so this is not the time, but let's find a very loving, honoring way of letting her know that. So some people are going away for a while and then coming back. Some people are staying on it more consistently. A lot of people, it's not really going to be, if they did something, if they ended something mid process, they might come back to it the next week. But very often, like, they're going to go with what's present in their lives. And over time, the system as a whole kind of softens, opens up to this kind of work. They get to know their various managers. IFS could also be done in a lighter way if the protocol in this kind of more in-depth way feels too surgical or intense for people. It could also be done in a lighter way. So, for example, the way some therapists might, some people might prefer to use IFS would be really just learning to name their managers. Managers are like the ones that are performing on the outside. They're not at the core. They're not the exiles, but they're like the perfectionism itself, or the one that worries about the food itself, or the one that fears the fear itself, whatever it might be. The ones that are in charge of making sure the exile stays at bay. Some people will slowly start to just learn and delineate, these are my managers. It's like getting to know your own internal family. Again, like the parent coming home. Who are the kids in charge? We're not yet ready to go to the
mm.
closets, but who are the kids in charge? And that gives a lot of relief for people. IFS, it's more than just awareness. It's the experience of releasing the grip of these parts on you, on your experience, on your functioning. So awareness is a little bit different than naming and what IFS calls unblending. When a person is very in a part and they're, let's say, what IFS calls very blended, they feel like this is me. When they're able to experientially
Yes,
create,
that's what I wanted to just ask you, because then there's the judgment of, this is, if this is how I behave, this is who I am. So you're removing that label,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. So many good things happen. One of them is it really, IFS takes off so much of that judgment and shame. So yeah, 100%, it's okay. I have a part, and the part is even just doing its best. It's not even a bad part. It's just doing the best it can. There's so much of that. And then also experientially, a person can really feel tremendous relief when they can name it and almost like internally, experientially separate from it, experiencing, instead of I am this, feeling like, oh wow, there's me. I can feel my adult self. I can feel my age. I can feel myself in this room here and now today. And I can see this precious little soldier doing what it can for me. I can I can be with it. I can befriend it. I can recognize it as part of my internal family doing its best. But the experience of that releasing that very tight grip, that very blended experience, also gives tremendous relief to people. So there are so many aspects of IFS. IFS could be used when you understand the bits and pieces of it rather than just the model as a whole. It opens up so many doors for different aspects of healing, different elements of healing, different ways of creating that internal spaciousness. That's one of the things that IFS does. You create space instead of, it's like almost a very tight knot. You pull apart the pieces and it's, oh, the strings. Oh, there's this
Mm,
part and it's just worried about that. But because it's going so extreme, I have the other part just trying to find balance. So the part that is overeating is just so worried about feeling anxious when things are quiet. And who knows what's going to bubble up if I let things get quiet. But then the other part that like criticizes me and makes me feel so bad for that, it's just trying to find some balance. It's worried that I'm going to take this too far. Everyone's just so good and so sweet and so precious. So even just this paradigm shift, this perspective shift, seeing these places inside as friends internally rather than enemies, as little people who are doing their best to help me. It's like
mm,
I have a song that I wrote about it, and I compare it to like little soldiers. It's like when you see a child soldier, your heart breaks. You're not
right,
like, oh my gosh, a child
right.
soldier. So big. here you're like, what is a child doing in
Mm,
uniform? What
mm,
is a child doing in uniform? I know this is a sensitive topic right now in Israel, and I don't think everyone can afford
right,
to have for child soldiers right now. But if we take it away from
right.
Israel and you just think of a third world country where children are put into fighting gear at 9 years old and you see a picture, it's like heartbreaking when you see a kid on the street acting aggressively or like independent and alone, and you're like, what's going on? This is a kid, right? So it's this kind of shift in perspective and shift in energy towards these are just little people inside doing their best to help me, and that gives so much relief. So there's so many ways to use IFS in addition to the modality way of using it, the really incredible process of accessing and reprocessing, sitting with those memories, sitting with those exiles, giving them what they need and allowing them to unburden, let go of that pain, update their sense, know that you're there, know that they're not alone in their little closet. They still are alone. Mom and dad could have come home ages ago, but if we didn't find the kids in the closet for all practical purposes, the kid is alone. And so there's so much that can happen with IFS.
So I'll tell you what's coming up for me, and I wonder if you hear this from others. As somebody that's very harsh on myself and how I show up in the world, so I have a lot of judgment. And when I would say when somebody does something that's not okay and giving them compassion, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm going to take it extreme. But imagine somebody that was on October 7th coming to you and said, okay, fine, Rikki, I was one of the soldiers that was hired by Hamas and I murdered somebody. I know it's extreme, but I'm taking extreme by on purpose because I want to understand. Or somebody that rapes or molests children and they come to Rikki and you're like, "Oh, so what part of yourself needs compassion that he raped a child or that he murdered somebody or abused their children because they were angry at people and they weren't aware or addiction that led to terrible things." What happens to that? They we give too much compassion to something. I know Gabor Mate talks about it a lot, but it's not there's never addiction, it's the wounded part. So,
Yeah.
explain to me how when somebody comes to you that they did something really bad and said like, how do you sit in that and say that give them compassion? Do you
That's a
understand my question? Is it too big?
no,
Okay.
I feel it. It's a big one, but I think it's a really important one. I'm really happy you're bringing this up. It's a really important one, and I'll also exacerbate the question a little bit more. I'll make it even worse. What if you're working with, like you said, someone who's abusing their children or something like that, someone who's mistreating their children? What if you're working with the child and the parent? And the child is like, thank God my parent is finally in therapy. And then they're like, wait, what are you doing in therapy? You're sitting and having compassion for the part of them that abuses,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
That is, I will say, if I'm being very honest, I think that this is one of the pieces of the IFS model that does leave people confused. And
Right.
I'll share my own opinion on this and how to relate to this. I'm going to, again, just be very honest. I don't think the IFS model is complete. I think that the IFS model does not do enough for how to place this aspect. So I do believe that compassion heals, but my question would be IFS almost has this implied paradigm where like everybody wants to do good. And if you have enough compassion, the idea is that the parts, their intention
The
is to
Brene
do
Brown theory that everybody's trying the best they can at that moment.
right. Everyone's trying the best they can at that moment. And I don't see things that simply. I'm a very humanistic therapist at my core. I tend to relate to people this way. I work with people that do have some really damaging parts, and I see the person beyond that. But the IFS, the thing that I think is a little oversimplified is that it's almost there's this assumption that if you have enough compassion for these parts and they're able to release their burdens, they want to do good in this world. They want to do right. And I don't know that's true. I think we have values like on a systemic level internally.
Yeah.
Some people, for
Yeah.
various reasons, are really good intentions is not the same thing as good. And good intentions, as we're noticing in the IFS process, the truth is there are many things in this world that are important. And the fact that a part might have the intention to protect you in one way is something we can have compassion for, but we want to hold that dialectically, which is
Mm.
part of what IFS does, and there are also other things that are important. That's why it bothers you that it's doing what it's doing. But the piece that it sometimes leaves out is the in between people. The IFS is very intrapsychic. It's about One part means we could see that the other part is having a hard time with it. The part holding the opposite consideration, the opposite internal concern, existential concern, is having a hard time with it. And we help them reconcile. But where IFS doesn't necessarily go is, what about the interpersonal? So it's like if a person comes in and their system is, yeah, they want to hold with compassion the parts of them that abused or did well. My question would be, is there room to help guide them or help them articulate something that doesn't just emerge organically with IFS? Like, why are you coming to me to work on this? What is important to you? What do you care about so much? I do a lot of work with what's your what and what's your why. If somebody comes after October 7th and they say, I feel so guilty, it's like, why? What do you care about? What matters to you? What do you value so much that's making you come and want to deal with this? What do you feel like you compromised or betrayed? And I think really naming that and honoring that and then helping the person reconcile the parts of them that did this in that context provides direction for where to go with that compassion. So it's not compassion in a vacuum and compassion almost with this implicit message of it all doesn't matter, as much as compassion in the context of healing towards a certain kind of value.
Accountability, the compassion,
Yeah.
responsibility, and with the compassion, it maybe even cause an effect while
Yes.
there's going to be some repercussions, or I forgot,
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the word, the consequence for at the same time have compassion. Does
Exactly.
IFS do that?
I don't think IFS does it enough. So when somebody comes in and they're burdened by the guilt of a certain part, but it's almost, I feel like we owe them a little bit of digging to help them articulate the value that if they get in touch with, it guides the process in a different way. So if a parent
Mm,
comes in because they're mistreating their child, no, I don't just want to help them feel great about that. I want them to get in touch with the part that really
that,
cares about treating their
right,
child. And in that context,
right.
compassion,
Yes,
grace, forgiveness, acceptance are critical.
yes,
But
yes.
compassion, grace, forgiveness, acceptance in a vacuum can also leave people cycling in a way that is not aligned with their deepest
And
values. Or
permission in whatever behavior, reckless behavior, and just saying, oh, this is the wounded part of me. And now I understand why it's doing it. So I'm permission to be not okay in this behavior once we're aware. Before we weren't aware. Starting IFS, we're aware. So now we have to be responsible.
exactly. And again, to take it back to this example, hypothetically, if somebody came in and said, I want you to help me not feel guilty because I'm treating my kids a certain way, and I feel very guilty when they look hurt, and I don't want to feel guilty, and I want to be able to treat them this way, and I want to not feel guilty. And like I hear about the way that they're treating them, and I think that's abusive.
Mm,
I
mm.
wouldn't want to facilitate that process, and I'd be very open with them. So that's already like a
Okay.
clinical issue, but I don't think IFS is complete and that it leaves it out on how to have an honoring and respectful conversation with a person, but where you prod a little bit so that you get them anchored in a certain direction and not just only going down the road of compassion, but without a decided upon goal. So
And
IFS is only
change to not be whatever you came in because it's not working. If you're coming in because it's not working, so what are you willing to do in order to make it work with the healing
right,
of the
exactly. And
wounded part?
a big issue because so many people are so burdened by shame, and therapists don't want to make that worse. And so they dance around this, and it's almost, I just want to blindly offer you this kind of compassionate, humanistic IFS approach towards this part. But I think that when people are coming in for help, somewhere inside of them, there is something that really matters to them, that really is meaningful to them, that they really care about, that they might be mishandling. And that can be named and articulated in a way that's very honoring. If somebody really doesn't want that, they won't come to therapy. So I think it's really a gift and a responsibility of the therapist to help the person articulate to what end, what are the values here. IFS doesn't really touch values very much. And I believe that we are creatures of meaning. We care very much about a lot of things. And this is, I think, where it's confusing. And some people will say, like, why should I just have compassion? And the issue is not compassion. It's compassion without context.
Mm.
Compassion is fantastic, but without context of what's your what and what's your why, where are you trying to go? In that context, of course,
It's
compassion.
like that saying in Tanakh, כל המרחם על אכזרים סופו להתאכזר על רחמנים, right? Say
Right.
it in English because you probably one
The
that
is
it's
that when you have so much compassion for people who are really acting in a way that is very cruel, In order to sustain that, you have to become so blind to actual compassion, which is much more balanced. Healthy compassion is balanced, and it recognizes it doesn't. You don't want to confuse compassion for denial, blindness, rationalization, justification,
Or acceptance as is for that without without the whole,
the
right?
bigger picture. Yeah, the bigger picture,
Yeah,
the dialectic
right,
considerations.
the dialectic.
Dialectics are about dialectics, the DBT model. What you are doing is so understandable. And what else is
And
important to you?
and
Yeah.
and
And we can provide that bridge. And this is one of the critiques people have with IFS, especially again, I've spoken to people whose abusive partners are in IFS therapy. The one who's being abused is tearing their hair out. And they're like, my partner feels very honored right now and very cherished right now and very understood right now. But they're not going anywhere with actually correcting their behavior in a serious way, in an integrated way. And again, my point is not, and therefore to shame. My point is to invite people. If you feel shame about doing something you're doing, let's not focus on the shame. Let's focus on, because what do you care about that matters so much to you?
what's your
That's an
value?
amazing
What's your
thing.
value?
What is your value?
Yeah.
Tap into that. That will give you the motivation. It's worth it to grieve your mistakes and grieve what you've done if you're working towards a value that's that meaningful. But when you don't even have the value, it's also scarier to look at this in the face, because for what? Just to discover the awful things you've done? It's worth it to look at it because you care so much about your kids, or you care so much about your marriage. You care so much about being a decent person. What do you say? We approach this with grace and compassion and forgiveness, but with a realistic sense of the complexity of this world and of human relationships and of what it takes to be a good person, not just a good intentioned person or an understandable person. This is about much more than being,
Mhm.
I think life is about much more than being understandable. We're all understandable. That doesn't make us, that doesn't mean we're living in a way that's aligned with our values or in a way that is good for the well being of the people around us or for ourselves or for sustainable long term goals. Understandable isn't enough. Compassion isn't enough. And I think, again, IFS trusts people to get there on their own, but I don't think it's a complete model. I don't, many people are self-directed in a way of wanting to honor their values, so they will or make that leap on their own. But when somebody's really struggling and they're almost really lost to themselves, I feel like they deserve that invitation and they deserve the invitation to articulate. I do the what and why with everybody, but they deserve
So you did your own addition to the modality because you said, okay, it's incomplete. So I'm going to take what it gives me, but I'm going to add on to it so they could take the clients further in their
yeah,
process of healing.
yeah. Again, now, so for some clients, they're doing all those other pieces. So the model, the
Mhm.
modality as it is enough. But
Right.
generally speaking, as a therapist, yeah, I don't really work with any model in total isolation. It could be in a session, we'll do a pure IFS session. But in the way I'm holding the
Mhm.
client experience, it's a much more complex, multifaceted, multidimensional. Like you gave examples earlier of like even somebody being told about a more multidimensional approach to healing. It's like if a person could be doing walks and that could really change their experience, the IFS model doesn't talk about walks. It almost assumes somewhere inside you'll know to do that, but that's not true. People deserve education. People deserve direction. People deserve invitations to something beyond the model. So my
Yeah.
approach has
Yeah.
always been about a much broader perspective. But as I'm in a single session, we're working through a specific trauma, it can really be miraculous. It is like watching miracles happen in front of you. It is unbelievable. And people, in the same
Wow.
way people remember their trauma experiences in a way that is so alive, people remember their IFS sessions in a way that feels alive. It's like taking a trip. Like it's like a draw. It's just like, it's whoa, I'm never
Yeah.
going to
It
forget.
sounds like a psychedelic journey, by the way. I did 2 psychedelic journeys, and when you were explaining it, I'm like, "Oh my God, this is exactly what happens when you're on
Yeah.
MDMA and you're like meeting it's such a love
Yeah.
journey of
Yeah.
self without all the noise in the background, and you really feel like you meet God."
Yes.
And it's just when you were describing it, I'm like, "Wow, that's so pure." It's
Yeah.
so beautiful. It's really magical. Do you usually work with, like, parents and children to like, is it a joint thing or is it very individual or couples or what, like 2 or is it one-on-one?
So IFS can be used. So there are some therapists who, let's say, do couples work and they will use an IFS model predominantly. And the beauty there, again, talk about directed IFS rather than just open-ended IFS. The beauty there is that there is a clear direction. The couple is looking to connect to each other in a more productive way. And so it's almost like Instead of focusing on what are you doing and then what are you doing and then what are you doing and then what are you doing, it's more about, okay, when this and this happens and you get activated and you get triggered from your partner because of your partner, you think it's because of your partner, you're not sure. Let's go inside. Let's see what that's touching. Let's see who's there. Let's see if there's a child part that's vulnerable to that message or to that experience. And let's really work with you holding that child part better. And then coming back into the here and now, into your current relationship with your partner from a more centered adult part. Now, you're still a person, you still have needs, but you'll be able to communicate those needs in a much more effective way when you're speaking from your adult part, from self, versus when you're speaking from a very young part that might really panic, that might feel existentially threatened. So if your partner says something that you feel is insensitive, it's not pleasant, it could be very hurtful, but as a resourced adult, you might be able to say, hey, sweetie, don't talk that way. Like, that hurts. And the person, hopefully, if they're a person who cares, might be like, oh, ooh, wow, sorry, I didn't mean it. Wait, what do you mean? Or they might be like, wait, I think you're being a little too sensitive. Whatever it is, it could be this way, it could be that. But young parts panic. Young parts freak out. Young parts lash out. How could you talk that way? You don't care about me at all. You don't care about anyone. There's something wrong with you. It's because of your father.
Wow.
And so that kind of, that more survival type of communication is very overwhelming. It's overwhelming to experience, and it's overwhelming for the person on the other side. So IFS almost can play the role of moderating and modulating all of this, of almost like tempering and buffering. So it's like there's a you in between your internal whirlpools of pain or exiles or firefighters, which are like the most extreme parts that come out when you do get triggered, between that and the people around you. So again, IFS in the original model didn't focus that much on the interpersonal, but today there are more models that really focus on how to bring this into couples work, how to bring this into intimacy work. People do gorgeous work with parenting, what they'll call like parenting from a place of self. You don't want your inner 7-year-old parenting your 7-year-old. You want
That's
you.
exactly what I'm thinking. Can you imagine taking your children and each one individually of what they need and working with them? How beautiful would that be? Because we're
Yeah,
like this. I always say we're the same parent, but we're different to every child. So every child has a different parent showing up, even though it's the same DNA, right, of the family.
right.
And I completely show up differently to all of my children because they bring something up with their reaction. So if we can come with the IFS tools, oh my God,
Yeah.
specifically.
Yes, yes, exactly. It is so gorgeous. And this is again where IFS also just bleeds into being a lifestyle. So living a life of self-leadership, of my internal, that godliness, that intentionality, that higher consciousness, that's the part of me that's leading. If somebody wants to
Mm,
lash out, I'm able to pause, unblend, and be like, "Oh, hello, sweetie. You're 13. I've got this. I'll talk
mm,
to you soon." Or
wow.
talking to a little part inside. I know that was hurtful, and I know that was so reminiscent of what you've been through, but sweets, I'm here now. I've got
Mm,
this. But they're them. They're a human person with limitations. That's okay. They're not gonna destroy you. We're good. We're good.
we're good.
Feel my
Mm,
presence. Feel my adult self. And then we let it. Again, people that really develop this as a lifestyle, it's like you breathe through really opening that channel. It's, oh, I'm okay. I'm in my 30s. I'm
mm,
in my 40s. I'm in my 50s. I can do this. Then you parent from a whole different place, and from that magical place of compassion, connectedness, creativity, curiosity, courage, calm. It's just,
yeah.
it's containment, and it's an amazing thing. And we might still be slightly different with different children from a more intentional place, but it's not our different children inside showing up for each of our different children based on what's being activated.
Mm.
So, yeah.
We need to wrap up, and I still have a lot of questions. I'm gonna wrap up with one question that's combined, and you could tell me if it's too big or too small. But when it comes to like the to PTSD and or addictions, is there is IFS can IFS replace can one become not and it's one of my things with addiction that like once an addict always an addict, and it's something so hard for me to accept because I believe in rewiring the brain, and I so believe, but at the same time people say to me, okay, Matana, you're not an addict, you don't have addict tendencies, so you can't judge because you don't know what it's like, so you can be all like nice and fruity and believe in change, but if once an addict, always an addict. So I'm wondering if people with addiction come to IFS and can they leave the once an addict, always an addict and heal that part?
It's a really interesting question. From like you said, I also really believe in neuroplasticity and rewiring of the brain. And at the same time, because of that belief, I know the intensity of a brain, like of a brain pattern, of a certain brain pathway, and repeated so many times that's been so present, that's taken care of so many
Mm,
things. Almost like the way I would put this, if I didn't want to say one's an addict, always an addict, I would say, but be mindful of that neural pathway. I don't know if it's going to go
oh, I
away.
like
You
that.
develop other neural pathways to combat it, to make
Oh, I like that.
to have something else in the brain, other go-to pathways, but it's there and it can have a little bit of the ramp up the highway effect by accident. If you're not careful, if you don't keep your eye on it, or like a little bit of a trapdoor effect,
Mm,
if you're not careful, if you don't keep your eye on it, it can pull you back into it. But as a whole, the internal system can shift and can rewire so that it's not that's 99% of who you are. That can become a much smaller percentage of who you are. And there could be so many other things to buffer it. But you want to be mindful of if there's an internal, again, like an internal highway that's just very easy to slip onto without noticing, you want to be very mindful of it. But yeah, I definitely would apply this way of working to people, but I wouldn't necessarily say it in definitive terms. I wouldn't necessarily either say once an addict, always an addict. I would say be mindful of the neural pathways that have been there for a long time, because turning a blind eye to that could be dangerous, and develop other ones and do it mindfully. But definitely rewiring is a real thing. There's no question about it. And you could develop other neural pathways and also really strengthen them through enough repetition. That becomes also an alternative, easier go to. But a certain vulnerability, a certain susceptibility, it's worth keeping an eye on. But I wouldn't be, I'm not black and white about it, I guess I would say. And also, I think it's
but
a
do what do the is it the same clientele? Or you could say, you know what? The truth is, like AAs for addicts, they don't really come to IFS. It's not the treatment that they pursue. It's for more like trauma or something like that.
yeah, so that's a really good question. And I would say like this, I tend to have a very multidimensional perspective, and I tend to really be of the belief that different models are better or worse for different people at different times. So if somebody does have decades of addiction and AA is helping them, like I wouldn't play with that. If they
Mm,
want to incorporate IFS, it definitely could be incorporated.
mm,
But I wouldn't
I
mess
like
with
that.
that. And you have people who have messed around with addictive type of living for 6 years. It's not nothing, but it's not 30 years. And they might try out the 12 steps and be like, okay, yeah, that was helpful, but I also want something else. And I do feel like I want to release this more. And they try IFS. And again, for me, it's if it's working is the most important, if it's working for you and also the meaning it has for you. So if somebody has trouble with
Right.
the meaning of their treatment, I want to get to the depth of that and understand what it means to them and what bothers them about that and what else they might be looking for. But I do believe
Mm,
again, we're very multifaceted and the world of healing is very multifaceted. And I would encourage people to lean into that. And something might be really right for a person for one phase of their life, and then they might be really ready to move on to something else at another phase of their life. They might need more of that 12 steps and community to keep them okay. I know some people that have been in 12-step programs for close to 20 years before they touched trauma work. But after 20 years
mhm.
of that rewiring, they were really ready for trauma work, and then they were able to, like, deep dive into
Mm.
so many
Oh, I
resources.
like that. Beautiful.
So based on the same concept, it's so be
Mm,
mindful of the rewiring, but consider the wiring that's there as well and be proactive about what you want to create or develop or dilute or shift or change. And again, we're so much bigger than one root. And I want people to give themselves that permission. And even if you're clear that something is what you need to do today or can't do today, that's not a life sentence. That's a now thing.
mm,
Yeah.
beautiful. Rikki, thank you so much for your beautiful journey down understanding IFS, which I was always so curious about. And now I really want to go try it on myself. So let's talk about like where people find a good practitioner. So for you, I'm assuming you don't see new clients one on one, but you refer to good practitioners you're in Israel. So are you allowed to refer only to practitioners in Israel? How does that work? And how does one go find one? And how if there is a therapist that wants to understand IFS and learn IFS, how do they get in touch with you?
That okay, that's a few good questions because my answer is a little bit I'm gonna come on from a different angle. I think in terms of how to find the good am I allowed to refer to people in the US? Yes, for sure. I just happen to know the Israeli community better, but I also know a nice number of therapists in the US. If people want real IFS therapy, I do encourage them to go to somebody who's really highly trained in IFS. If people want IFS training, the real IFS training, I would say they should go directly to the source and get the official IFS training. My training is, again, more of this multidimensional perspective. IFS is one of the things that we bring in. Our emphasis is a little bit different than IFS is within a bigger context. So if people are like, I love the sound of this, or I've done this, I encourage them to go to the real training, the official IFS. And if people are looking for IFS therapy, I encourage them to go to people who took the official IFS training. But in terms of making a referral and actually finding the right practitioner, my answer is actually less specific to IFS and more about what I would tell anyone looking for any type of therapy. And that is the normal things: call a referral agency, ask them for an IFS therapist, whatever. Do your due diligence, call the therapist, ask them when they say they practice IFS, did they actually learn the official formal IFS? There are at least 3 levels that people could be taking in the model. You want somebody who has either been with an IFS supervisor for a while or really done all those 3 levels, or at least 2. But you want to know, are they really doing it as it's supposed to be? But the other thing, and this is what I tell everyone about every type of therapy, is never trust a label over your experience. And so if you're going to an IFS therapist, like the most you can do, it's like the most you can do is your research in advance. But nobody can tell you this is the person that you're going to feel okay with. Nobody can tell you this is the person that you're going to feel safe with. They could say on paper it looks good. And whenever I make a referral, I really encourage people, listen to yourself, listen to your gut. It has to feel right. It could take a few tries to find the right person. So do your due diligence on paper, but never let that override your feeling. And I would say to really keep in mind that the model is different than the use of the model. And every user, every therapist is going to use it a little bit differently and bring in their own flavors, their own perspectives, what they resonated with, what they like doing, what they don't like doing, what they believe in, what they don't believe in. So even if you do try IFS with something, you love the sound of it, but something felt wrong in the way it was applied, you don't have to write off the model as an option. You get to go to a different IFS therapist and try it out again. Because really, flavors can range enormously, even within similarly trained professionals. So it's really be an informed consumer. Listen to your gut, listen to your feeling, listen to your experience. There are so many different ways to use this model. You want a therapist who will see you every step of the way and never silence you in the name of the model. If you're saying, no, that doesn't feel right, and they're like, okay, which part is saying that? But you're like, wait, I'm trying to tell you it doesn't feel right. Why are you continuing? You want to really listen to yourself, and a therapist who will listen to you. But there are phenomenal therapists who practice this in a really informed and educated way. Do your due diligence to find them, and then trust your gut on whether or not they're the right fit for you.
Okay. And how do people reach out to you if they want to work with you?
So to work with me directly, like I said, I would be available really just for consultations. They can reach me at either my email address, which is Rikki@relationalresilience.com. My website
And we'll
is
put it in the show notes. Yeah, we'll
Sure.
put that in the show notes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would
And
be the best.
for yeah, that'll be best. They'll reach out to you and they can see everything on your website.
It's a little outdated, but they can reach out to me and I'll direct them to the information that they need. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And the best way is through an email to reach out to you?
Yeah, the email is also on the website. Also, if they reach out through the website to info@relationalresilience.com, it will get to me, I'll be told. So that's, yeah. They
Okay.
can submit a form. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, what's your favorite book you have ever read that gave you like an inspiration about healing that you say, okay, if I tell people to read this book?
Wow, I love that question because I don't have a lot of top competitors. I love so many books, but then there are like 2 at the top that really shifted my perspective. I would say this is not really a book about healing, but I think it's very healing to read this book. A lot of my respect, I think that when it comes to trauma, one of the hardest things about trauma is that the way we act when we're in a survival state, when we're threatened, is so different than the way we generally act as people. And so when we get triggered or activated or traumatized in a certain area and act a certain way because of it, this comes back to the shame, the compassion, the need for compassion. We can be so hard on ourselves and so judgmental on ourselves. And I think that one of the things that really shaped me as a trauma therapist is that one of the things I was involved in early in my career was actually I was involved in a project where we taught empowerment self-defense training to survivors of trauma so that they can actually reclaim their survival system and reclaim their power and reclaim, like I said, trauma is an amazing system gone awry. It's not a bad thing. It's a brilliant survival system. Brilliant. I could go on and on for hours about the brilliance of the survival system. where the learning was too overwhelming. It was too much too fast. The experience was too painful, too fast. We didn't have enough to hold it and make sense of it. But the book I read that gave me a lot of appreciation for the survival system is called The Gift of Fear by Gavin Becker. He also has a second book called Protecting the Gift, which is about keeping children safe. And The Gift of Fear is a book about the power of intuition, which is a function of his intuition is a function of the survival system. It's just a book that helps you realize how incredibly brilliant this system is. So The Gift of Fear, I love it, but for a lot of people, Protecting the Gift is probably a little bit more immediately relevant because it's also about protecting children. The Gift of Fear is his original book and it's a little broader, but I think it's a brilliant book, even just the first few chapters. And the other book that I really is a book called The Power of Discord. I actually have it right
Never
here
heard of that.
because it's like one of my go-to books for so many things. I actually literally have it on my desk. The Power of Discord, and you could see how much I appreciate this book by all these little pins inside.
Wow. You're a good student.
Books I like get all clipped up like that. My copy of The Gift of Fear is also open. But The Power of Discord is really about embracing the complexity of life, the complexity of relationships, rupture and repair, like not being afraid of life's challenges and recognizing that is what makes us, and that's what makes us trust. A relationship that has not overcome challenges is more precarious. This is about developing that trust to ride the waves and the bruises and the battering of life. And I don't want to oversimplify. I work with trauma survivors all the time, and they're like, this isn't bruises, this is shattering. And I know that. I think it's a really beautiful book. I don't think it oversimplifies. On the contrary, I think it really just leans into the complexity of being a person in this world and holding all of that. It's a very beautiful book. Each chapter is a little bit different, but on resilience and healing and wholeness. But it's not like resilience or trauma. It's like the resilience in the trauma or within the trauma or from the trauma or the trauma in the resilience. It's a very beautiful perspective. So I think the perspective of embracing the survival system and the perspective of embracing a deeper idea of what resilience means, I think both of those really reframe these very painful experiences. And again, I work with trauma survivors all the time. The reframing of the survival system, of trauma responses, of pain, it has me see people differently. And I think that has a huge impact on healing, how we see ourselves and how we are seen and if we're understood. And all of that is embraced and contextualized. Those, I would say, are two of my top picks.
Okay, my last question. What do you think we need more of in the world when it comes to healing? Or what do you wish you saw more of in the world when it comes to healing?
So this actually connects to the thing I said about this book. I think more of, at least on the part of healers, as a therapist, what I wish I saw more of when it came to therapists would be, I think as a therapist, when therapists show up and they want to help people heal, so many therapists are coming from such a good place. And it can be scary to lean into the ambiguity of healing, to lean into human experience, to hold the complexity of human experience. And I wish therapists had more support and were able to provide more support to their clients, because there are so many ways to shy away from that are very subtle, but people feel that. Like when you're the client on the receiving end of that, you feel if somebody is really able to hold your experience or hiding behind a model or hiding behind an oversimplification or hiding behind kind of cliche advice. And I don't blame therapists for this. I think therapists are trying so hard to be on the front lines and they do the best they can.
Right.
I just wish they had more holding of this complexity in universities and training institutions and trainings. I wish that every model, every modality in the training, there would be a section on and when this doesn't work and who this doesn't work for and what else you might want to consider. Always see
so
more
beautiful
than just the one thing. And I guess similarly, I would wish for people to honor that reality and that truth in themselves. And when somebody can only hold a sliver of your story or a sliver of what you need, that's not, you are a full person who needs holding like the rest of us. And hopefully you will pursue that sometimes in bits and pieces from different places and people and maybe some from yourself. But the need is real. Like you are so much more than a sliver of who you are or just an oversimplified aspect of your experience, or let's say in the context of this conversation, you may or may not fit into a modality. You don't have to fit into a modality. You're you. And I would love for healing to be able to hold the complexity of that and offer you a more complex path to healing, a more multidimensional, multifaceted path to healing. and experientially for people to be able to hold that and embrace that. And again, that's part of what I really love in this book is it embraces complexity. It's not, here's a quick answer, here's a pat phrase, I know exactly what you should do. It's let's chill out in the confusion. Let's hang out and not be alone in that.
Yes, and the curiosity. Tal Ben Shahar says, be okay with the curiosity of it and see
Yeah.
what is it here to teach me and how can I get through it. And I often tell people when they come to me and they ask, like, how did you heal? Because I was on medication for 2 or 3 years, and I got off of all my medication, and I was on a lot, in and out of the hospital. And I
Wow.
said, there's no one thing, and what worked for me probably won't work for you. It's when do we graduate? We try everything. And when maybe one thing, you'll pay $10,000 and it will take you 1% further, maybe. And then you'll pay something, you'll go and you'll read a book that costs you $14.99 on Amazon that will take you 30% to the next thing. It's the everything. And when we graduate and okay, we got to here, now we go to the next thing. And without that first thing, we wouldn't be able to get the next thing. So is exactly what you said. And to say, okay, I'm welcoming. And the journey of healing is forever. It's not like there's no destination.
Yeah.
There's no destination. It's just more and more.
Yeah.
And to really be okay with the fact of trying something and it didn't work, and that's okay. I tried EMDR. I tried it 4 times. It so didn't resonate with me. Like and then most people that I speak to, it was their big aha and their big breakthrough. And for me, I think it just caused me more trauma. I'm like, okay, I can't be in this because I'm more of an analytic mind. I want to understand. I can't do the tapping and the movement of the eyes or I was like going crazy. I'm like, I'm out. It's not for me, and that's okay. And what's next? So I so agree with embrace the different things and try it and see where you got with it. And then you can go to the next or incorporate it more into the next chapter. Yeah. Somebody called me yesterday we were on an intake call, and because I think the thing I speak about the most in rewiring brain and healing is about gratitude. Like for me, gratitude was the thing that I believe healed me. So they're like, look, this is what I have on one of them. I have like books about gratitude everywhere. And they said, can you really heal your mind with gratitude? I said, can you really heal your mind without it?
Wow.
So and I think it's just like you take it and you incorporate it in everything else. It's not, oh, I'll just tap into gratitude and I'm going to get off of my medication. No, but without it, how can you ever heal a mind? I often say that to people. It's not one and done. It's a collaboration of different things.
Yeah.
Rikki, thank you. Thank you. It was such a treat to meet you, to talk to you, and I hope I'll get to see you in person one day, B'Yerushalayim. Bezrat Hashem. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your avodat kodesh, really. And your gentleness is like, in itself, is healing. So you're a gift.
Thank you again so much for having me. And yes, if we can ever meet in person, that sounds like an absolute pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. Bye till next time.
Looking to reduce your anxiety and stress, relax your muscles, or get a better night's sleep? Check out Maxifies.com, 100% legal hemp, where you can find doctor-formulated, lab-certified, high-quality CBD oils, tinctures, and other items, cultivated, grown, harvested, and packaged in the United States, and available in different sizes and strength formulas. Check out Maxifies.com, that's MAXIFYZ.com, and use coupon code HOPE to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. That's Maxifies.com.